Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. And thank you to, I'm going to call you Dave and Heather, if that's all right. No, we decided to dispense with the honorifics tonight. And we have a special, I understand there's a group here from Regis High School. Am I right? Yes, there you are. Yes. Thank you guys for coming. And I think I'm particularly happy that you all came, because one of the things I wanted to talk about this evening was how to kind of model a successful career in public service. I really looked forward to this evening, because the two of you, to my mind, are exemplars of how to do that. Both of you had extraordinarily successful careers in public service, and I want to sort of try to explore what that took, how you ended up on top. I want to ask you to be immodest, because I know both of you are terminally modest when it comes to expanding your own success. And then I want to get into servant leadership, the idea that was behind this book. But let's start with, you guys were at the Air Force Academy at the same time.
In fact, we started on the same day.
This
would have been June of 1978. We both showed up same day, swore in as cadets at the Air Force Academy.
Did you know each other at that point?
We didn't know each other well as cadets, no.
But you knew of each other?
Yeah, because there's a funny story about that. But
well, I'll just tell you that I was part of the group that made the top half possible.
Yes, we're going to get into your very different academic trajectories in a moment. But so Heather, when you were there, how many women were there in the Air Force Academy class?
Well, I was in the third class to include women. So the senior class did not have women. And our class was about 10%. 10%. 10% women, so about 120 of us, probably 80 of us graduated.
Yeah. How did that feel?
Well, initially, so I grew up, my father and my grandfather were aviators. I grew up in a very small town in New England, and nobody in my family had gone to college before. And at the time, I was pretty clueless, and I knew I wanted to go to college. Somehow I knew that I was going to go to college, but I really didn't understand entirely what all of that meant. And so in some ways, I was fortunate to go to a place like the Air Force Academy where they told you what to do. Here, go to these classes. Okay, I that's what I'll do. And I didn't even know at the time probably you had to have a major. So there were a lot of things I didn't know. And I think I was fortunate to have made that choice to go to the academy. My grandfather, as I mentioned, was a flyer. He was one of the first pilots in the RAF in the First World War.
Oh, wow.
And then came to America.
Yeah.
And became a barnstormer and opened little airports all around New England, including a little cinder patch called Logan International Airport, and was the first fixed-based operator and the first guy to fly an aircraft into a place they cut out of the forest in southern New Hampshire that's Manchester-Boston Regional Airport. And so he started aviation in New England between the First and Second World Wars. My dad was also an aviator, enlisted in the Air Force, and then a commercial pilot. And so and he came, he married his high school sweetheart, and in the 1950s, when a lot of women didn't even drive, he taught my mom how to fly. And they rebuilt
flew as well.
They rebuilt an airplane together, and then we lived in this two-bedroom house that had a kitchen and a living room and a den, and these two bedrooms. And the den was supposed to be my bedroom, but I was in with my two brothers because my dad was building an experimental open cockpit biplane inside, because 1600s. So my mother was a very tolerant woman.
Yeah.
So I grew up around aviators. None of them had gone to college, but when they opened the Air Force Academy to women when I was a junior in high school, that looked interesting to me. And my dad died when I was young, but my grandfather was still alive. And so I went to talk to him about it. And, this was a pretty new thing. And my grandfather had 2 sons and 5 grandsons and me. And I was thinking about this Air Force Academy thing, but I remember where he was sitting in his living room when I went to talk to him, and told him I was thinking about this Air Force Academy thing, and they had just opened it to women, and he got real quiet. And then he said in his Scottish brogue, which I won't attempt to imitate, he said, well, I flew with some women in World War II. The Wasps, towing targets and ferrying airplanes. And they were pretty good sticks. So I guess that'd be okay.
Oh,
So I had his blessing,
yeah,
and then a full ride scholarship, and I went to the Air Force Academy.
yeah. Dave, you're also from a aviation family.
Yes. Yeah, so my dad was a Vietnam fighter pilot. And my older brother was already at the Air Force Academy, and so I applied because it was a family business, right? And I got a letter back, and I remember getting a letter back, and it said, thank you for applying. You were not selected because, and there was all these boxes, and all I remember is every box was checked. And so I thought, no big, right? So I applied to a couple schools. I got into the University of Wyoming, and I was going to go out there and study forestry and music and my passion at the time. And I got a call. I was bagging groceries at the grocery store on base. We called it the commissary. And I get a call, and they said, hey, this call from this lieutenant colonel. And I got on the phone, he says, hey, we offered you a prep school scholarship, a preparatory school scholarship, and we're wondering why we never heard back. Well, it turned out they sent it to my aunt, who had never forwarded it, so we'd never gotten it. I said, hey, thanks, I'm going to the University of Wyoming, I'm going to study forestry, you can go ahead and give it away. He said, you sure? I said, yeah, absolutely. And I went home that night, and we're sitting around at dinner, and my dad's reading the Stars and Stripes newspaper, and I told him, hey, I got this call from the academy, and they offered me this, prep school thing, but I told him I'm going to Wyoming. And I remember him looking at me with those steely blue fighter pilot eyes, and he said, let me see if I got this right. Somebody called you today and offered you money to go to school, and you told them no, you'd rather use my money to go to school. Let's just say I called the academy back, and that was my origin story.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want to pause for a moment and talk about this notion of aviator families. Both of you guys fly, right?
I don't fly anything like he flies.
No, but you do fly.
My husband, I fly a Cessna 152, which goes slower than my husband's Ford on I-10. Yeah.
And Dave, you flew F-16s.
I did.
In how many? In Desert Storm and
Desert Storm, and then the Balkan campaigns, and then in Afghanistan and Iraq.
And what did your father fly?
F-4s.
F-4s. What is it with this kind of intergenerational aviation thing? Is it a bug you pick up from your parents?
Yeah, there's something genetic about it, a little probably. But I think for me, and I actually enjoy experimental and small aviation, general aviation, much more than I've flown in the back seat of F-16s and of F-15s and other aircraft, and I don't like being strapped down. I just that's not fun to me. I'd much rather be out in a little puddle jumper, just checking out the pecan trees on the Rio Grande.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Dave, can you describe? Sorry, I'm obsessed with flying as well. There's no aviation in my family, but I love nothing more than. What's it like to fly an F-16? Can you describe it?
So, I remember taking folks up for a ride, and I think, did we get you a ride in a B-2?
You promised, but it was right when my wife was pregnant with our first child, and there's no way I could win that battle.
Okay, well, then I think we got to get you into the B-21 when it comes out. So I used to love taking people up for a ride in the F-16 for the very first time. And, I would tell them, look, we're going to stay on the deck till about 400 knots. And then I'm going to pull the nose up, and we're going to give you the elevator ride of your life. And when we get to the top at about 10,000 feet in full afterburner, I says, I have no choice but to roll over inverted. And we're going to be upside down. But if I fly this well, you can hold a cup of coffee in front of you, and I can be flying upside down, and the coffee will not spill. Because remember, right, 1G is 1G, and the coffee doesn't care where it comes from. Yeah. And so I would love taking them on that ride, because I remember that my first experience when I went on there. And so for especially all the high schoolers that are here, if this is something that at all you're interested in, I can just tell you that it's a magical experience.
Is it hard?
What's hard about military flying, especially when you're in a single seat, cockpit, is the difference between good and great is actually not stick and rudder. It's mental. Because when I was at the top of my game, if you asked me after a mission what I did in my cockpit, I couldn't tell you. Because my mind was, I was responsible for 100 different airplanes doing different things, over 1,000 miles of airspace. And so I had to make sure that I was able to, manage this formation against all the unknown threats that were coming up and all the changes. And so if you asked me what happened in my cockpit, I couldn't tell you. It was all just natural. That was when I was at the top of my game. And so the greatest pilots I ever flew with were the ones that actually, their mind could actually fly faster than the jet.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm a university president. There's a lot of stuff going on all the time. I like to go out walking too, but if I go out walking, I'm thinking of the 10 things I have to do when I get back. If I'm flying, I am 110% doing what I'm doing and enjoying it. And then when I get back an hour and a half later, I've been away. And so for me, it's the intensity of focusing 100% on something that you enjoy, but you have to be there in the moment. And the precision of it is something I like too, even though I don't do it at 400 knots. I'm like at 82 knots,
Yeah. So the two of you arrive at the Air Force Academy, and I'm curious if I was talking to you, you're both at that point, what, 19, 18, 19?
1892.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I'd asked you, what do you imagine your career is going to look like? What would you have told me? What were your ambitions at that age?
I would have been an experimental test pilot.
That's what you wanted to be.
That's what I thought I was going to be. And then, and I talk about this a little bit in a book. After my freshman year, I was involved in a lot of stuff, and I was supposed to take like 21 credits the fall of my sophomore year. I was going to drown academically. So I stayed in the summer, and I took computer science, required course. Most of the curriculum was required. And it was a computer science course. And I'd never been exposed to computing. It was 1978, before the first desktop was invented, and I found out I was pretty good at it, and very quickly became the tutor for the other students when we weren't in class. And this faculty member there, this young captain, saw that I was pretty good at this, and he gave me 2 pieces of advice. One of them was, he said, you're pretty good at this computer science thing. You might want to think about majoring in this. And I thought, I like it, but not that much. And besides, I'm not sure there's a real future in this computer thing. I probably should have thought about that a little more. But the other thing he said was, if you weren't so busy with all this extracurricular stuff, you could focus on your academics and you could apply for a Rhodes Scholarship or something. I had no idea what he was talking about, because I'd never heard of that. I never met anybody other than a lawyer or a doctor who had gone to school for more than 4 years in my town. But he said I couldn't do it, which was, at least, he probably knew a little more about me than I knew about myself at the time, which was, if you told me I couldn't do something, I was at least going to find out what you thought I couldn't do. And so I found out about this scholarship, and I went up to this one-person office who had all these notebooks, and she was welcoming and warm and said, look at these things. And I talked to other people along the way, and I decided to apply for something which, at the time, first I thought maybe, all right, Rhodes Scholarship, that's sponsored by the Department of Transportation, right? I mean, I had no clue. But 32 Americans every year get a full ride scholarship to go to Oxford University in England. And I applied. Now, my grades weren't good enough. And I actually applied. I asked the university, I asked the academy to let me apply for the Marshall or for the Rhodes. And they wouldn't let me apply for the Marshall because my grades weren't good enough. And they were right. But I took the shot. And they were looking for more than mere bookworms. And I ended up being awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to go to graduate school in England.
Had you been to England before?
Never. I didn't have a passport before I, went to the academy. And it was another life-changing event. but I never would have, my resume, you mentioned, has a lot of things on it. But there's a lot of things that aren't on it. You won't see on there that I wasn't chosen as a marshal because they wouldn't let me apply. You won't see on there, and I'm talking particularly to those of you in high school, that I wasn't accepted at Brown University out of high school. What Wayne Gretzky said about hockey was always true for me too. Is you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So take the shot.
Mm-hmm. Can I just offer too a little bit of advice for any of you who are thinking of co-writing a book? Pick a Rhodes Scholar.
But Dave, so if I'm talking to you on your first day at the academy, what do you imagine your career is going to be?
So it's interesting. One of the chapters in the book is about finding your purpose. My first 2 years at the academy were really a struggle because I honestly didn't know if that was what I really wanted to do. And I used to like to say that, academically I was struggling, militarily I was on restriction, but at least athletically I was slow. So we made a mutual decision after 2 years that I needed to go get my act together.
And you say we?
We being the academy dean of students, and called me in and said, we're thinking about starting a test case of a sabbatical for a year. Would you do it? And I said, I would absolutely do it. And I'm sitting here in New York, so this should resonate here. So I actually connected through an academic advisor to become a roadie for a guy named Harry Chapin. And so I got on a 10-speed bicycle, left the academy, and started riding across the country from Texas to join up with him here in New York. And that was before the days of the internets and cell phone, and so we lost contact. And I found myself riding on the back roads of America for a year. And along the way, I had families who took me in. And these were just hardworking families in small-town America. And these were families that were involved in their community and their church and focused on their kids. And they were taking me in. And so what I didn't realize at the time was I was meeting the America that I would eventually grow up to defend. Mm-hmm. And so when it came time to make the decision of going back to the academy or not, I called him back and said, hey, if you'll have me, I'd love to come back. My last 2 years, were a completely different experience for me because I embraced what the academy stood for. And I had a purpose for mm-hmm. going back. And so I never had aspirations of senior leadership. I just wanted to be able to support and defend this country.
Can I just pause on this for a moment? So you drove a 10-speed bicycle with no helmet, I'm presuming.
No helmet.
From Texas. We're in Texas?
So we started in San Antonio.
From San Antonio, and you ended in New York City?
No, so the nice thing was I had no destination once I lost contact with Harry, so I followed the weather. I rode north until I got to Iowa, and then all of a sudden I got cold, and I turned right, and I went east until the East Coast, and I went all the way down the East Coast into Florida and all the way across and ended up in Albuquerque, New Mexico on a 10-speed bicycle.
If one of you have kids?
I do.
If one of your kids at the age of 18 said, Dad, I want to ride a 10-speed bicycle across the country for a year without a helmet, what would you say?
Yeah, probably the same thing my dad said to me. You are crazy.
But so this is a really interesting thing because both of you would rise to, Heather, you would become Secretary of the Air Force. Dave, you would become Chief of Staff of the Air Force. The two highest ranking positions in the Air Force. And you both start out at the beginning of your careers a little bit lost. Dave more so than Heather, but with all due,
Let me say one more thing, and I don't often say this publicly, and Dave knows this. My dad died when I was young. Mm-hmm. My mother remarried to an alcoholic. I was going to make different choices. I left something else. Quitting the academy was not an option for me. There are probably young people in this room. And when I was growing up, we weren't allowed to talk about that outside of our home. And I found out later I was the only one in the family who ever followed that rule. It's like, wait a minute, but every one of you may have something going on in your life that you're not willing to talk about or you're not supposed to talk about. you can make different choices. You really can. Where you start out doesn't have to determine where you end up.
Let's start with Dave. When you reflect on your rise, so there's a point where you're pedaling a bicycle across America without any clear idea of where you're going. And then we fast forward, how many years? 30 years, and you're Chief of Staff of the Air Force. How do you make sense of that journey? What is it? And like I said before, I want you to be immodest for a moment. What did you have that the Air Force saw and rewarded?
I think that the essence of servant leadership, which I believe is a lifelong journey that never ends. I would tell you that I'm not the leader that I want to be, but I'm still working on it. I think we realize along the journey that leadership is an incredible gift. And it's a gift that's offered to us by those we're privileged to lead. And it's a gift that we have to earn and re-earn every single day. I think it was Tom Friedman, who said, the only legal performance-enhancing drug on the planet is trust. And so what I think was what helped me be successful was, first I came from a family that instilled strong values growing up. And then, in the military, especially we talk, to our high schools here, you are sort of infused with core values of integrity and service and excellence, and it becomes part of your character. And if every single day you truly treat the leadership position as a gift that you have to earn and re-earn every single day based on how you live your life, what decisions you make when no one's watching, then that is, to me, is the essence of success in any career field, whether military or elsewhere. And for anyone in a leadership position who ever starts feeling entitled to the perks that come with rank or responsibility, that's actually a really good indicator of when it's time to retire. Mm-hmm. Because what that means is you're not working every single day to earn that trust and re-earn that trust that is the gift that you've been given.
Mm-hmm. Dave mentioned 3 words: integrity, service, and excellence. The values of the United States Air Force, and ones that we share and were kind of woven into us, particularly at the academy and for Dave and the family he grew up with, and to some extent for me as well. Integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Every institution that I've chosen to be part of has certainly integrity and excellence as 2 of their core values. Because if they don't, then I'm in the wrong place. I don't want to be part of an institution that doesn't care about the truth or about integrity. And excellence doesn't mean perfection. It just means trying to do the absolute best you can with the resources you have available and being a little bit better tomorrow than you are today. And those things, integrity, service, and excellence, aren't bad stones of a foundation of a life.
Mm-hmm. This is actually a good moment for me to. I've had encounters with both of you, which I've thought about a lot. Heather, you will not remember this, but
I actually probably do. The RAND Corporation.
Yes. So I used to be on the board of this think tank called the RAND Corporation, and when Heather was Secretary of the Air Force, she came and gave a presentation. And on the board of the RAND Corporation, there were all these like
very intimidating people, including
very intimidating people.
Yeah.
Some of whom had been, at least 2 of whom I think had been Secretary of they were your predecessors as Secretary of the Air Force. I mean, imagine these, like, they were both in their late 80s and 90s, totally brilliant, macho beyond words, not highly evolved masculine types. And I remember you came in the room.
And Malcolm.
And then me, like, what am I doing here? You came in the room, and the first thing you did is you went to those 2 guys, and you shook your hand, and you paid respects. You paid your respects to them before you did anything else. And I was so, at the time, I was so taken by it. I remember turning to Michael, my friend who was also on the board. I was like, who is this woman? I'd never heard of you. I had no idea who you were. But there was, and the mood, the minute you did that, you owned the room. Everyone was like, okay, this is something we want to listen to. And then Dave, you and I were speaking at a conference together. And we were in the elevator. Do you remember this? You don't remember this. I'm sure you don't, because it's part of, but I do. Because you do this all the time, I suspect, but we were in the elevator talking to the CEO of the company whose conference it was. We were having this really interesting conversation. It's a very powerful guy. Dave's a very powerful guy. We were engrossed. And in the corner of the elevator, there was an older African-American man who was, I think, a janitor for the hotel. And in the middle of the conversation, we're going from like the 8th floor to the 2nd floor. And Dave stops the conversation, says this to the CEO, reaches across, you shook hands with the man, and you said, you know, how are you doing today, sir? It's a pleasure to meet you. And then the guy said, it's a pleasure to meet you too. I was in the Air Force 20 years. And I was so, I am ashamed to say it, but that man was invisible to me because he wasn't part of this circle of interesting people, you know, engaged in power. But you saw him and you made him feel like he mattered in that moment. And I was like, I remember I grouped those two experiences together because I wondered, is this you? Is this your families? Or is this the Air Force? What am I seeing when I see this? In both those situations, you were the most powerful person in the room, and yet you chose to kind of, not subjugate yourself, but you put yourself second to to everyone else.
In my case, I had some wonderful role models in the military who treated people that way. And that every airman has a story, and every individual has value. And it happened to me when I was a youngster, and I know how it made me feel. And I've watched this guy do it all over the world. And being the Secretary of the Air Force, you have all of the authority under the law. The chief has all of the influence. And he also, I remember we got in trouble once and lost our security detail in London. And we're walking back to Westminster. And, here's Chief of Staff of the Air Force, all the stars and the scrambled eggs on his hat and everything. Everybody knows who the Chief of Staff is. Nobody knows or cares who the Secretary of the Air Force is. But every person that stopped him, he stopped to chat with and let him take a selfie with him and so forth. It was but he's like that. I've watched him do that in Afghanistan and in Iraq and everywhere.
When people ask me, hey, do you miss the Air Force? I say, no, I miss two things. I miss young airmen and traveling on the Gulf Stream. But what's fun, and again, this just goes to that essence of servant leadership, right? And serving others in the position of leadership is that everyone matters. And what I would love to do is, and we did it tonight with Audie and others, right? It was just, I would always find that when you stop someone and look them in the eye and don't break eye contact and say, hey, tell me your story. Sir, whatever, what do you mean? I said, no, your story. Just tell me your story, right? And then in the story, you get sort of the essence of the person, right? And there's always a connection, right? Somewhere, whether it's that gentleman who was
You
spent time
didn't
in the
know
Air
that
Force.
guy in the elevator was Air Force.
Oh no, I just knew that we weren't going to get to our floor without him. Right? And
Yeah.
and I would just say this is, when I talk, I love talking to CEOs, especially on airplanes or whatever, and we start talking about hiring veterans. And I always tell them, I says, I can't think of a single reason why you would want to hire any military veteran, perhaps with 3 exceptions. I said, number one, every one of them comes with a set of core values based on the discussion we just had. Mm-hmm. Number two, they have incredible work ethic, because guess what? We're not paid in the military based on how much we work. We're paid based on our rank. So we actually know how to roll up our sleeves and just get the job done, join teams, right, and be part of something much bigger than ourselves. And third, they bring loyalty because they've been part of this institution of the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, right, Space Force, for at least 4 years, probably longer. So with the exception of core values, work ethic, and loyalty, I can't think of why you'd want to hire a military veteran.
What's left? You guys, the two of you, when you were, so just so everyone knows, Heather and Dave served together. Your tenure overlapped when you were both in these positions of leadership. And one of the crises that you faced together was this case of Devin Kelly.
Yeah.
And I want you guys, and I have to say that in this book, Get Back Up, that is the story that really, really resonated with me. It seemed like everything you were talking about was exemplified in that story. So I want you to tell us what happened, how you reacted, why you reacted, and why it was hard.
So this was still is probably the worst day of my professional life. It was a Sunday morning, and probably about lunchtime when a telephone rang, and it was General Sami Saeed, who was the Inspector General of the Air Force. And a young man named Devin Kelly had walked into a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, and opened fire, and killed and injured about 26 people, and then killed himself. And General Saeed said it looks as though he was an airman and had been dishonorably discharged. And we won't know until Monday morning, but we think we failed to notify the FBI to put him on the list so that he couldn't buy a weapon. And General Saeed called Dave, and Dave and I then talked, and we agreed we would meet and get the whole team together on Monday morning at 9 a.m. And so we did, and General Saeed said that they had checked, and yes, he had been dishonorably discharged, had clearly had mental health issues, and the Air Force had failed to notify and put him on the list to prevent him from buying a weapon, which we were required to do by law. And then it got worse. Several years earlier, the auditor for the Defense Department, the Inspector General, had looked at compliance with that law in all of the services and had identified that this was a problem that needed to be fixed. So we had an audit finding that we failed to fix. We knew as an institution it was a problem, and we didn't fix it. So we had to decide what to do. And there were times when Dave and I, very often actually, would disagree on something or engage on something or look at a problem and talk it through, and we'd come up with, Dave may be a better secretary, and we communicated 7 or 8 times a day on all kinds of things. I never made a major decision without asking him for his advice. But on this one, there was no daylight between us from the very beginning. We knew that we had to find out whether someone was accountable for this particular failure. We knew that we needed to find out whether there were other cases, so we put together a team of about 60 people on a task force to go through every record of everyone who had been discharged from the Air Force since the law had been changed back in 2007 and earlier if necessary, to see that we had properly notified the criminal record check system. And then we had to decide what to do about it publicly and with the Congress. And we got a lot of different advice. I mean, we weren't there when it happened. Maybe you want to fuzz this. The lawyer will always say, well, you're maybe liable if you say, we're going to get sued anyway. We knew that.
Heather, who's giving you, I want to pause on that. You say you got a lot of different advice. What kinds of, you don't need to name names, but what kinds of parties are weighing in here and telling you what to do?
Around that table that morning, you would have had Government Affairs, the Legal Office, the Inspector General, Office of Special Investigations, the internal political kind of appointees, Dave and I, some of our special assistants. So talking this through. And Dave and I decided to own the failure, that we would acknowledge right up front that he had been an airman, he'd been dishonorably discharged. It should have been reported to the FBI, and it wasn't. We had been told there were problems with the system, and we didn't fix them. and then here's what we were going to do to fix the problem. By doing that and owning the failure, we were able to focus on fixing the problem and not on trying to deny, delay, deflect. And then we had a press conference the next morning. And we actually released a statement that day, but a press conference in the Pentagon the next morning to say just that. And it was almost like the air went out of the room. Because, Washington, I think not just Washington, but there's often a tendency to, deny, delay, deflect. And we chose not to do that. We decided to own it and fix it. And then I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill with members of Congress who represented Texas who were justifiably wanted answers to questions. And Dave went even further than that, did something I don't even think I could have done, honestly.
Well, and Heather made me a better chief, for sure. There was a funeral that they were having for 11 of the victims, and I offered to go down and represent one of the airmen who'd lost several members of his family. And I offered to do it in uniform, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to cause, pain to this family, this community. So I asked, and they said, no, you'll be welcome. So I went down for the funeral, and I will tell you that it's probably one of the most spiritually powerful moments that I've ever had, in service or out, because the pastor, Frank Pomeroy, stood up and asked us to pray for the victims, the families, and then he asked us to pray for the shooter. And in one of the caskets was his 14-year-old daughter. And I'll never forget the courage that took for him. But this is one of the things that I think we do, again, as servant leaders, right? When it's inevitable that bad things are going to happen on your watch as a leader. It goes with the territory. The question is, how do you handle it when that moment comes? How do you handle it for not only that moment, but also teaching the next generation how to handle that? Because one could argue that we're not judged as leaders on how high we fly. We're judged by how high we bounce. Happy bouncing.
Mm-hmm. I have a bunch of questions about this. One was there any moment in this process, and by the way, this must have gone on for how long? How long were you dealing with the kind of after effects of this?
Months, probably at least 6 months. I had to testify in front of Congress about it, and then we stayed in touch with the community. So this was a community outside of San Antonio, Texas, so it's near Randolph Air Force Base. There were a lot of military families there, too. And the first thing the chief did was to reach out to the mayor to say, what can the Air Force do to support this community? Because for us, it was an Air Force community, too.
Yeah. Was there any moment when either of you regretted your choice of action?
Never.
No.
What did the people say who had urged you to do something else when they saw what happened?
It wasn't your fault. It happened before you were Secretary-in-Chief.
No. When they saw that it turned out as well as it did.
Yeah. So, interesting. So I testified on the Hill, and when for any of you who think you might want to testify on Capitol Hill, I don't recommend it on any subject, but you should expect to be grilled whenever you go to Capitol Hill. I actually have had harder questions on far more benign topics, and I think part of it was we did own it and explain what we were doing about it. We had a legislative liaison at the time, two-star, General Basham, and he was Steve Basham, fantastic legislative liaison, a B-2 pilot by profession, stoic, would sit behind me and just with this very serious face on. And he was there that Monday morning and was there at all of the briefings with members of Congress from Texas and elsewhere who were affected, and then was there the day I testified. And when we walked out, he said, Madam Secretary, I learned something today. And I said, what's that, Bash? And he said, the result of today's hearing was really established in the 24 hours after the event happened. You and the chief owned it. And that has helped to determine the outcome.
And I'll just share that, every setback, every failure is an opportunity to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And success is something that servant leaders share. Failure is something that servant leaders own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we were able to teach, perhaps, those who had given us different advice, was that this one was an appropriate one for us to own.
Yeah. But if this is my puzzle, which is that why, if you've made such a compelling case for owning the failure, right? And neither of you lost your jobs, neither of you lost your reputations. If anything, it enhanced your reputation. If given that, why is it so difficult for others to follow the same path? In most cases, in Washington and elsewhere, people deflect, deny, and what was the third one?
Deny, delay.
Deny. I forgot my D. My third D. Deny, delay, deflect. So why is it so? Why would people continue to follow a strategy that?
To be fair, sometimes you don't know all the answers, and so it's appropriate to say we're finding out, and to be truthful about it. That we do have to dig in and find, but we knew the relevant answers that morning. But I think sometimes, first of all, most high need achievers don't want to be. It's one thing to fail; it's another to be seen to fail, and they don't. And I think a lot of high need achievers don't want that feeling, and it's very uncomfortable to sit in front of United States Congress or in front of the press in the Pentagon to say we screwed up. And while some people would try to cut you slack and say, well, you cannot take off the mantle of leadership. As an institution, you have to own it. And a lot of times, that was initially a very uncomfortable decision, even though we felt it was the right thing to do.
And then, Dave, you, in uniform, went to the funeral of somebody after you had taken responsibility for the failure that led to the shooting. Did you, on the flight down there, what was going through your mind?
Well, more than anything, it was being humble to be able to walk into that room and represent, because one of the young airmen who had lost 7 members, we brought him back.
7 members of his family?
Of his family, his extended family
Yeah.
that were from this community, right?
Yeah.
So, the first thing I did was go over and put my arm around this young man, to say, hey, and he was, standing there, tall, proud of his family. And it's one of those moments where, I don't know how many times we would, look at these young men and women and think, our future's in great shape.
Mm-hmm. And it's also one of those, where do we find young men and women like this? Where do we find these people who are willing to step up and serve in this way? And the answer is, they're in all of our communities. They live on our block. You know them. You mentor them. They're in your families. This is a wonderful country.
Mm-hmm. And I'll bet you a few of them are in this room.
Yeah. We're going to go to questions soon. Wait, where's Audie? Is it appropriate for me to go to questions? Yeah, whenever you're ready. Okay, but I thought I want to ask just a couple more quick ones, and then we can. I'm curious. Was that the hardest decision in your time in holding these positions, or is there some? Can you give me another example of something that was really hard?
As a senior leader, you don't get to make the 90-10 calls. Those are usually made before they get to your office.
What's a 90-10 call?
In other words, where the decision is really clear.
Oh.
And if you are making those calls, you probably are micromanaging too much. You shouldn't be making decisions that are easily made. So there are often decisions that come into the senior leader's office where you're not really sure what the right thing to do is, and you're taking risks either way. I would say that day, that event, was a terrible day professionally, and it was an awful, awful thing. There have been other difficult calls or risky calls. I mean, you're talking to this guy here who's been in combat. He's ordered other people to go into combat, you try to be worthy of those whom you lead and try to make the best decisions for the mission and accomplishing that mission. Mm-hmm. And try to do so with some humility, knowing that you're not going to be right all the time.
Yeah.
And I would say that probably some of the most important decisions that we made together were personnel decisions. People that we picked and placed in leadership positions, but not just for that particular job, but also the next 2 or 3 jobs, right? Because we were trying to build the breadth and depth that the nation needed from its senior NCOs and officers. Mm-hmm. And boy, when you get that one right, it's magic, right? And you just watch an organization thrive because you found someone who was just the right match for that organization. But you don't get them all right. Mm-hmm. And the ones that you get wrong, again, you got to own that, right? And I relieved very few people in my career, but I will tell you, the couple times that I had to, I never once said, man, I did that too early.
Yeah.
Every single time I said, I waited too late. And the damage that was done to that organization and the people that were in that organization in that time frame, guess what? Whose fault was that? Mm-hmm. That was mine.
Mm-hmm. What's the best, Dave, what was the best perk of being Chief of Staff of the Air Force?
Other than working with Heather?
Is it that house you lived in?
That house was special, and the time we spent together on the fire pit
so just so
was
you know,
magic.
If you're Chief of Staff of the Air Force, you get to, is it Fort McNair? No, what is it?
Fort Myer.
Fort Myer.
Yep.
Across the Potomac from the Capitol, on like a hill, is it not? There's like you've never seen, you would never know it was there. And there's all these incredibly gorgeous Victorians along the river, and that's where you live if you're chief, and also head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff lives
Chairman
there?
of the Joint Chiefs, the Vice Chairman, Chief of Staff of the Army.
The whole
Just so you know, the Secretary of the Air Force lives in a double-wide student stand that you rent in Alexandria.
It is. It's so Colin Powell lived in one of those.
Yes.
Used to fix up his Volvos. Did he fix up?
Oh yeah. So I maybe can I share real quickly the story about our fire pit, right?
Oh, yeah,
so one of the things that I always looked for when I was interviewing folks for position was curiosity. Are they still curious? Are they still learning? Right? Are they still growing as a leader? Or do they feel like they got it all figured out? Right? And so as someone who's been, is always curious, I love your books because you make me, you cause me to think in different ways. Every book. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've referred to Blink or I've referred to, the tipping point and all of these, right? So, now I have a chance as chief. You want to talk about a perk? I get to invite Malcolm Gladwell to dinner. How cool is that, right? My favorite author. So he comes over, and then we decided to go out in the fire pit, and I'd invited a few of the friends from the neighborhood to come over. And I remember we were sitting out there.
And friends in the neighborhood are like all the top people.
Yeah, chairman.
So
they're my neighbors, chairman, vice chairman, right?
I've never felt safer. Like if any threats to my,
So the fun part is when Malcolm says, "Hey, do you mind if I record this?" And we all looked at each other and went, "Yeah, sure." We got,
that was the scotch.
The scotch, sure. What? And that was fun. That actually became a chapter.
Yeah, it was a really, it was an incredibly special evening. It made me the other really fun thing was Dave introduced me to his successor, C.Q. Brown, who flew me down to Maxwell Air Force Base because I did all this research for my book, The Barra Mafia at Maxwell, and I had an incredibly fun. We should go to questions, but I will end on this thing. One of the things that I little tiny detail about the Air Force that that means a lot, I think, is the fact that the chiefs of staff of the Air Force, you guys all refer to each other by your
Numbers.
by your number, by what number you were in the. So it's very like you were. Are you 24?
21.
You're 21.
I was 24. I'm second F 24.
Yeah. So like, Dave was the 21st Chief of Staff of the Air Force, going back. So you go all the way back to the Second World War, or right after the Second World War. But the idea, and you're the 24th. The idea is that you are the temporary occupant of an office, right? It's not about you. It's about the. And I love that. I want everyone in a position of power to adopt this practice. I think if you want to be mayor of New York or you want to be CEO of IBM or whatever, you should be identified by your number. It's a beautiful.
Well, here's one other thing that you also have a call sign they use on the radio, they're not secret or anything, but the one I love, and it's historically it's passed on from one to the next, and you can change it if you want to, but you generally don't. And what I love is, and they'd embroider it on the back of the collar of our athletic jacket kind of things that we wear, that the office all got. And I love the one for the Secretary of the Air Force. It's Liberty.
Oh, this is, yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to tell you that when I passed the flag to CQ 22, I told him, I said, hey, there's only one award I want to win the rest of my life. He said, what's that? I said, world's greatest predecessor.
That's good. Well, this has been so much fun. We have time for some questions. If anybody wants to we have a bunch over here. Go ahead with the vest, yes. Stand up.
I guess firstly, thank you for inviting us all from Regis here. We really appreciate learning all from you. But I specifically wanted to ask about, obviously the Air Force Academy is portrayed by you as almost a microcosm of creating servant leadership. And in the service academies, we sort of recognize the salience of identity as a part of servant leadership, where the service academies are the few institutions in the country which are allowed to institute affirmative action policies. And I'm sure Dr. Wilson can talk about sort of the evolving role of women in the military, which is now sort of back in the popular discussion via like the discussion around standards. So I was wondering how you think that sort of identity is a important part of serving leadership within the Air Force and within the military, but also how that represents it within leadership writ large.
Sure, let me, and I've been asked this question in different ways over time, but I'd like all of you to just close your eyes for me for a moment. Just close your eyes. I want you to think about the person in your life who would do anything to protect you, who would would come into a burning building to find you if you were in there. I almost guarantee you that half of the people in this room are thinking about their moms. You should never think that it requires that you be a man to be a protector. And that's what the United States military is. Now, I worked on the National Security Council staff when I was quite young, and left there a little bit early. I was on the staff for President H.W. Bush, and to go up to the Hill because a member of Congress had passed the House to change the 1948 law that would allow women. There was a 1948 law that prohibited women from flying combat aircraft, and she proposed to change the law, and it was pending in the Senate. And I went up to work with some other women aviators. I was a civilian at the time, to get them to change the law. I was actually on firing line with Bill Buckley. Talking about that. I had worked at that time with some exceptional women aviators. If the best we have happen to be women, and the United States sends second best when the best is required, then we were compromising the security of the nation. And so we should always send the best. And sometimes the best happen to be women. So let's make that the standard. that all of us will be protectors for those who are the vulnerable. And many of us are called to serve.
Another question from the Regis folks. Yeah.
All right, this is a question for both of you. So I was curious if there was ever a point in your careers where there was a contradiction between your own personal morals and what was required of you in your role in service of the state, or if you ever had to grapple with the pragmatism of preferring the interests of the United States over what you personally believe was right or wrong.
Probably the time when, as a service chief, I wore 3 hats. I was a chief of a service, chief of staff of the Air Force. So my job was to organize, train, equip airmen for what the nation needed. I was also a joint chief. And as a joint chief amongst all of the chiefs with the chairman, my job was to advise the Secretary, the President, the National Security Council, the Congress on the use of military power. And then I was an international air chief. And I had to, if I was doing the job right, I kept all those 3 balls in the air. And I kept a balance. And there were times when I actually had to advocate for something that was not in the best interests of my service. There were times that I actually had to be the strongest advocate for the United States Navy because we needed something that the nation needed as a joint chief. And there were times when I actually pulled money out of the Air Force budget to help build Army command and control systems in order to build trust among the services, because we never go alone, we go together. So it really wasn't a conflict for me, but as you might imagine, I got a lot of pushback from those that were singularly focused on always doing what was best for the Air Force. And I always had to educate them and give them the why behind, no, this is about a greater good. This is about, committing ourselves to the fact that we never fight alone. We always fight with one of our greatest strengths as a nation? We're able to rally like-minded nations to make the world a better place for you and eventually your kids and our grandkids.
I would say there was one time or one set of issues that were very difficult and that related to faith and morality. I was a member of Congress at the time. There was some difficulties at the Air Force Academy related to faith. And think about it for a second. We have separation of church and state, right? Enshrined in our Constitution. But we have members of the military who are chaplains. The centerpiece of the United States Air Force Academy architecturally is the chapel with 13 spires. No, not 13.
One for each apostle and the 5 chiefs of staff.
5 for the chiefs of staff, right? So 17. So there was some controversy about military officers seeking to promote their faith with their subordinates. And there's a fine line there. As a commander, you had to ensure that the spiritual needs of those under you are met, while accepting that we are people of many faiths, but we are a faithful people. That stewardship is a difficult line to walk sometimes for some people who are deeply faithful themselves. And for me, it was a little easier. I grew up in New England. My father's family was Scottish Presbyterian. My mother's family was Irish Catholic. We were raised Episcopalian, which is like, you can't agree on red wine or white wine, so you go with rosé, I guess. But as a New Englander, we didn't discuss faith outside of church. We didn't even hold hands on the street or something. It was just kind of a rural New England thing. You just don't talk about those things. But for someone raised in an evangelical church, where the Great Commission is part of what your life is supposed to be, that can create a conflict. And working that through so that cadets at the academy didn't feel pressured to pursue a particular faith was something that was important. And I actually I was on the board of visitors at the time and worked closely with some of it was really an issue involving someone of the Jewish faith, and worked with the Anti-Defamation League and several of the Jewish groups in Colorado to try to work this through in a kind of quiet way.
Mm-hmm. We have time for a couple more questions. Sure.
First, I just want to say thank you for your service, both of you. My question is, how do you find and preserve your why during your triumphs and failures in the service academies during your service and beyond?
Sometimes it's little things, and Dave talked about going. I didn't go like riding a bike across America. Yeah, that wouldn't have even occurred to me. There was but I'll tell you one little. Sometimes it's about the little things and the little reminders. I was having kind of a bad day at the academy, and this upperclassman said, Wilson, drive on out here, which means, you're going to get yelled at again, or you have to do push-ups or something. It was, I don't remember why it was a bad day, but it was a bad day. And he said something about, you seem like you're having he was actually sympathetic and said, how are things going? And I said, sir, things are fine. And he said, no, really. And I said, I said, sir, I'm fine, or something. He goes, I want to show you something. He took off his cap, those ones that look like an envelope, the flat ones. And on the inside, so on the outside, he had a prop and wings, which is the symbol of the airman. And you earn one at the academy. But on the inside, where nobody else could see, was a second lieutenant's bar. And every time he went in and out of a door, he took off his hat, and that bar was there. Just a little reminder of why he was putting up with this for 4 years to get to that. That was the goal, right? From that day on, I wore a second lieutenant's bar on the inside of my hat. And then when I became a member of Congress and began nominating students to go to the service academies, we'd get them all together before they all take off and go to basic training with their parents. And I'd send my husband, who was a veteran and National Guardsman, out to the Kirtland Air Force Base to go to the uniform store, and he'd get me a bunch of lieutenant's bars. And I gave each one of those young people a lieutenant's bar. I showed them my hat, and I gave them a lieutenant's bar. And the second one of the pair, I kept on my office wall for each class. The first one was a gift, but the second one they had to earn to keep inside their hat. Then once I had 4 years' worth of students, when those lieutenants came for their second bar, I had them give one of them to the incoming class to keep it going. So sometimes it's little things to just keep you focused, or people you can talk to along the way, and that's also really helpful to be able to share things when there are good days and not so good days. Thanks for asking.
So I'm one of those fighter pilots that has an odd number of takeoffs and landings. So in 1999, I brilliantly intercepted an enemy missile with my aircraft.
Which is the way a fighter pilot would say that.
Right, and was shot down. But I'm sitting here today. This goes to my why. I'm sitting here today because of some incredibly brave young men and women who risked everything to come pull me out. And I will tell you that my country was not going to sleep that night until I came home. And so that became my why from that moment forward, because they risked everything to get me out. They get a bottle of scotch from me, single malt, good quality, every year on the anniversary. And I will just tell you this, they are praying I live a long and healthy life.
My favorite, you tell the story in the book, and my favorite moment is when they're in radio contact with you, they have to figure out whether you're who you are, who you say you are, because it could be a trap. So Dave's on the ground. You're on the ground. Yeah. The helicopter's coming to try and pick you up, and they don't know whether it's a trap or not. And tell them how you established your bona fides.
So when you're at the academy, one of the traditions they had there was you had to rate every meal. And the way you rated the meal was this little checklist sheet, and we all rated it the same way. And the answer to every question was fast, neat, average, friendly, good, good. I can't tell you what the questions are. I can just tell you what the answers were, right? And now they teach you when you're going to be part of a rescue, you got to be submissive. You got to not hold out a weapon because they don't know whether it's an ambush. You don't know whether they got to authenticate you to make sure that you're who you say you are. And I didn't want to turn on my flashlight or anything to highlight myself because I could see the enemy, just over the horizon. They were out looking for me. And so I jumped on the radio very quietly and I said, I could use a fast, neat, and average rescue. And the pilot came back and said,
Friendly good is on the way.
friendly good is on the way.
I love that story. You were like in some field in Kosovo. Where were you again?
I was in Serbia.
In Serbia. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I will tell you that I got into the helo, the pararescuemen had body armor on, and we were taking rounds in the helo. We took 5 rounds in the helo that night, and these guys piled on top of me because they had body armor on and I didn't. And I remember thinking, man, these guys are heroes, right? And then as we lifted off, I remember thinking, wait a minute, we're getting shot at from below. Maybe I'm body armor for them.
That's right. I think we have, let's see, one last question. Sure, right here.
Viren Mehta, thank you so very much for everything you continue to do. Now that it is Space Force, the leadership requires different decision making. We are talking about going to the moon, perhaps Mars. Resources are limited. How would you advise your successors to address these challenges, and especially because other countries are catching up much more quickly?
So let me talk a little bit about, America is the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. And they're seeking to develop the capability to deny us the use of space in crisis or in war. There's a difference between what the military does in space to protect our national security and what NASA does, which is, to do science experiments, International Space Station, go back to the moon, to the Mars, and all of that is civil space. What the military does in space is about 70 or so satellites that do weather, that observe the Earth. That blue dot on your phone is not provided by your cell phone company. That is provided by about 40 Guardians outside of Colorado Springs, Colorado, that provide that through the GPS satellite system for the world. Enables billions of dollars of commerce. Communications through space. We look for missile launches, so stare at the Earth looking for... So communications, command, control, there's not a military mission that's not enabled by space, but there are no X-fighters yet. So I think there are a couple of things about the Space Force. One is they're absolutely vital to every mission and every war plan that the military has. The second is they're a very small force. They're smaller than the Coast Guard. They're primarily half of Guardians in the Space Force are in the state of Colorado. A lot more, the rest of them are sprinkled around between Florida, Alabama, Texas, and California. I worry that when the sizzle goes away, that maybe they will not have the strength in the budget battles in the Pentagon or on Capitol Hill to sustain this absolutely vital capability for the country. That said, the decision was made to make them an independent force. I hope they figure out how to make the uniforms better and the song better, but those things to me are trivial compared to the capability that we have to have there among Guardians.
And we talk about this in the book. We have a chapter called Squint with Your Ears that's dedicated to the journey that we both were on in building this service. And I will tell you, just share with you that I had a picture that I would share every once in a while when I was talking to members of both the Air Force and the Space Force. And it was a picture of me in uniform holding my 2 granddaughters, and I would introduce them. And I'd say, okay, now this is Ava and Ray. They don't know it yet, but they're members of the class of 2040 at the Air Force Academy. I will let them decide which one wants to join the Air Force and which one wants to join the Space Force. But I can tell you this, on that day in 2040, when they walk across the stage, there will be a test question for the class of 2020, 21, 22, 2025. And the test question is, what did you build? Did you build 2 services that are built on a foundation of trust and confidence and jointness? is there no air between air and space? Or did you build two services that are doing the typical bureaucratic thing, which is, dig a moat, build a castle, fill it with dragons, and defend yourself, right? Because joint operations require space in every single military mission. And so the jury's out. The test question is still there. And so that's something that I think we're both following very closely to see how they build these two services, because what an opportunity they have to build them on a foundation of trust.
Mm-hmm. When I'll give myself the privilege of the last question, which is, have either of you guys seen the movie House of Dynamite?
Not yet.
Got to see it. The whole time have you guys, anyone here seen House of Dynamite? Oh, everyone's got to see it. Now that you've listened to the two of them, see House of Dynamite, and then ask yourself the question, what would Heather and Dave say about this movie? It's a scenario, because it's about a movie about something terrible happening to the United States, but you would have been in these rooms. That's why I think it would have been, I wish you'd seen it. We could have discussed it, but oh well, that's for next time. Thank you very much. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate you guys coming.
Thank
And,
you. Thank you. Thank you
thanks
all.
to all of you.